Venezuelan people mobilize in the city of Caracas to reject foreign threats and defend national sovereignty. In Ecuador, protests against the policies of Daniel Noboa's government continue for the third week. And a new round of indirect ceasefire negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, kicked off on Monday in Egypt. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. And now we go to Venezuela. The people of Caracas and the people of Venezuela is performing a great march for peace and against the U.S. threats against the country. Let's see live images at this hour. The mobilization that has been called by the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, started today in the community of Petare and will include as well the active participation of all popular sectors of the country under the slogan, "Let's win peace, defend life and stop criminal threats." The mobilize will march to the United Nations headquarters to express their repudiation as well of all of the actions that have been performed by the U.S. in Caribbean waters, that is also putting at risk the security and the peace of Latin America, a zone that has been proclaimed for decades as a zone of peace in Latin America. And in Venezuela as well, the head of the Peace and Dialogue Commission, Jorge Rodriguez, publicly denounced terrorist plans of the local far-right against the U.S. Embassy and other diplomatic headquarters in the Bolivarian country. Rodriguez unveiled that the Venezuelan government alerted the Donald Trump's administration through various channels about a false flag operation planned by the local far-right. Moreover, the also head of the Venezuelan National Assembly assured the warnings were also extended to an European embassy so that it could communicate the seriousness of the situation to U.S. personnel. In this context, Rodriguez informed that the Venezuelan government had reinforced security measures at the embassy. And let's go over the main points of the message shared by the head of the peace dialogues in Venezuela, Jorge Rodriguez, that starts by warning that through a false flag operation prepared by extremist sectors of the local right wing, an attempt is being made to place lethal explosives in the U.S. Embassy in Venezuela. He concluded by assuring that we have also notified an European embassy of these events so that it may communicate the seriousness of this information to U.S. diplomatic personnel. At the same time, we have reinforced security measures at said diplomatic mission that our government respects and protects. And former Colombian President Ernesto Samper Pizarro took to his X account to denounce the U.S. military attacks in the Caribbean region. This way, Samper emphasized the attacks by the powerful U.S. military, which has the Venezuelan Caribbean under siege, are not only illegal but also cowardly and inhumane in terms of international law. These are truly extrajudicial executions like the false positives in Colombia that kill suspected drug traffickers and threaten the lives and livelihoods of humble fishermen, as President Trump himself acknowledged yesterday. The former Colombian head of state concluded his message by underscoring that the United States is no longer governed by the laws that made it respectable in the eyes of the world, but by the will of thugs who seek to subdue their enemies by force. And Venezuela and Cuba condemned imperial terrorism in the context of the commemoration of the 49th anniversary of the attack on the Cubana de Aviación airplane. The governor of La Guaira, José Alejandro Terán, condemned state terrorism on the 49th anniversary of the criminal act perpetrated by the North American imperialism, which left 24 victims of the Cuban youth fencing team, the absolute winners of the Central American and Caribbean Championship. At the same time, the Cuban ambassador to Venezuela, Dagoberto Rodriguez, expressed his solidarity with the Cuban people and also with the families of the victims of the Cubana airplane crime, and condemned imperialist threats that have affected the country's national security and damaged its public and private interests. And we stay in Cuba. 49 years ago, on October 6, 1976, a terrorist attack was carried out against a Cuban plane carrying 73 passengers from Barbados. In memory of this crime, Cuba commemorates the Day of the Victims of State Terrorism every October 6th. Cubana de Aviación flight CU-455 took off from Grantley Adams Airport in Bridgetown, bound for Havana. Minutes after the departure, 2 explosions caused the plane to crash into the sea. There were no survivors. Among the victims were 57 Cubans, 11 young Guyanese traveling to Cuba to study medicine, and 5 Koreans from an official delegation. Among the Cubans were 24 youths from the Cuban junior fencing team that had won the Central American and Caribbean Championships. Those responsible for the crime, terrorists acting on orders from the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, were granted full immunity. The Cuban people remember the attack on Flight 455 as one of the most inhumane acts perpetrated by imperialism against the Cuban Revolution. In other topics, in Ecuador, protests against the policies of Daniel Noboa's government continue for the 3rd week. In response to the escalation of protests, the executive deployed police and military forces throughout the country as part of a systematic repression on those exercising the right to protest. For its part, the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities warned that the Noboa government is seeking to silence and repress the people who are only seeking to assert their social rights. In this scenario, there have been more than 200 human rights violations to date, with 112 people injured and 1 death reported due to the excessive use of police force. And in Argentina, the President Javier Milei has been charged with abuse of authority amid the political crisis facing his government. The complaint was filed by the lawyer of the former President, Cristina Fernández, after the head of state took credit for the imprisonment of the political leader. In this regard, he recalled that the Argentine constitution prohibits the government from intervening in judicial cases and influencing the decisions of judges or prosecutors. According to the legal representative, the complaint states that these declarations by Milei are not isolated, but rather respond to different political sectors that acted in coordination against figures of the opposition. And now we have a short break coming up. But first, remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Monday, Egypt will welcome Israeli delegations and the Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, to hold a new round of indirect talks on a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Negotiations will begin with the participation of 3 mediating parts: the U.S. government, Egypt, and Qatar. Local authorities reported that they are making preparations for both sides to reach an end to the conflict in the face of continued aggressions that has left more than 67,000 Palestinians killed since October 2023. In this scenario, the authorities reaffirmed that they are actively working to create an environment that will allow for the implementation of the first phase of the hostage exchange and the withdrawal of the Israeli army from the Palestinian coastal enclave. The Gaza government press office reported that the Israeli army dropped more than 200,000 tons of explosives in 2 years of aggression, resulting in the destruction of more than 90% of the territory. The report indicates that losses in the enclave exceed $70 billion, 5 billion in the health sector, and 4 billion in education. It also warned that more than 2 million people are being subjected to a combination of genocide, famine, and ethnic cleansing. The numbers of fatalities from the war campaign are overwhelming. More than 67,000 Palestinians are reported killed, and an estimated of 9,500 people remain missing. The report alleges that Israel also destroyed some 268,000 homes, rendered another 148,000 uninhabitable, and partially damaged 153,000 others. And we stay in Palestine. Citizens testified to the worsening harsh living conditions imposed by the Zionist occupation forces and the absence of basic services necessary to sustain life. Despite the lack of means of subsistence, Gazan citizens refused to leave their homes due to the impossibility of obtaining transportation or finding safe shelter in other areas. In their testimonies, they explained that hundreds of families have remained in dangerous and bombed areas, not by choice, but because they have no other option due to the high cost of relocation. Palestinians are calling on the competent authorities to take urgent action in response to the service and economic crisis and to mitigate the collapse that is putting pressure on citizens' lives. And the Spanish government announced that it will file a complaint with the International Criminal Court, ICC, regarding the illegal interception of the global sumo flotilla. The activists aboard the flotilla vessels were detained and attacked by Zionist forces. They reported being subjected to physical and psychological abuse and being denied access to lawyers. In this regard, the Spanish Minister of the Interior, Fernando Grande Marlaska, stated that any attack on people in international waters constitutes a deprivation of liberty under national and international law. Also, the minister highlighted that the complaints of the flotilla crew members must be subject to legal proceedings before the ICC. In this scenario, 29 activists from the flotilla arrived in Madrid on Sunday. However, 28 Spanish activists are still abducted. And 21 Spanish activists from the global humanitarian sumo flotilla arrived in Spain, deported by the Israeli regime. Carrying Palestinian flags and chanting slogans such as "Palestine will be free," dozens of supporters waited for the activists who landed at the Madrid airport. Last week, the Israeli Navy illegally intercepted the ships of the global sumo flotilla in international waters, putting an end to their attempt to reach the Gaza Strip with humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people. Upon arrival, the Spanish activists claimed to have been victims of intimidation and sleep deprivation by Israeli officials. Also, in this matter, Greta Thunberg arrived in Greece together with 27 Greek citizens who were also on board of the humanitarian flotilla. The Swedish activist asserted that Thunberg was pushed and forced to carry an Israeli flag during her detention. Other crew members claimed to have been subjected to inhumane conditions during their abduction by Israeli forces who denied them water, clean food, and confiscated their medication and belongings.
Okay, let me be very clear. There is a genocide going on in front of our very eyes. A live-streamed genocide on all of our phones. No one has the privilege to say we are not aware of what is happening. No one in the future will be able to say we did not know. Under international law, states have a legal obligation to act to prevent and to stop a genocide from happening. That means ending complicity, applying real pressure, and ending arms transfers. We are not seeing that. We are not even seeing the bare minimum from our governments.
Also in this context, on Sunday, released Tunisian activists from the global sumo flotilla arrived at the Tunis Carthage International Airport. Tunisian citizens gathered to cheer on the participants who were returning from Turkey after being deported by Israeli occupation forces. Participants described the conditions of their detention as abusive, including beatings and insults. The ships of the Global Summit Flotilla, carrying activists from 44 countries, were intercepted in international waters. The first list of deportees included 10 of 28 Tunisians who were part of the humanitarian mission. Now we have a second short break coming up. Before we invite you to visit our Facebook page at teleSUR English, there you'll be able to watch our top stories, special live coverage and much more. Follow our page and activate the notification button to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to From the South. Somali government forces managed to fully restore order after ending a 6-hour siege by Al-Shabaab militants at the high-security prison in Mogadishu. On Sunday, the government confirmed that the army took full control of the Godka Gilako penitentiary, killing the 7 attackers. Somali authorities reported that there were no civilian or security personnel casualties and that no prisoners escaped. The incident occurred hours after former road blockades were lifted in the capital, barriers that had been in place for years to protect critical government installations. Despite the forcefulness of the military response, ambulance services reported the transfer of about 25 people to hospitals after the confrontation. And we go to Indonesia, where the death toll after the collapse of a school in East Java province rose to 54. The director of operations for the National Search and Rescue Agency, Judy Bramanteu, confirmed the figure. The search continues for more than a dozen people who are presumed to remain buried under the rubble. Scientists are examining the possible causes of the collapse, and one main hypothesis suggests that the lack of building regulations and standards contributed to the collapse of the structure. And 2 fires in the municipalities of Saint Florent and Olera in the Noboa region of France destroyed almost 400 hectares of forest. The first fire broke out west of the municipality of Saint Florent, spreading rapidly towards a camping area near the Lera highway due to the wind. Shortly after, a second alert was issued for a second fire near Lake Padule, also in the municipality of Olera. Local authorities reported that 50 vehicles, 180 firefighters and 4 aircraft were mobilized to fight the fire. No human losses were reported. And in Belgium, a massive environmental protest took place in the country's capital to demand urgent action in response to the climate crisis. On Sunday, approximately 30,000 people took to the streets of Brussels to urge authorities to stop public funding for fossil fuel projects and allocate these resources to a fair and inclusive environmental transition. The crowd marched in a festive atmosphere, waving banners and slogans calling for save the planet and end the dependence on fossil fuels. This initiative took place weeks before the United Nations Climate Change Conference, at a time when European countries are facing increasing criticisms for the slow implementation of their climate commitments and environmental policies. In other informations, on Monday, the Georgia Prosecutor's Office accused several radical opposition groups of attempting a coup d'etat following post-election protests that tried to seize the government palace. The Prosecutor's Office confirmed the charges against the several leaders for the crimes of rebellion and attempted overthrow of the government. In the charges, the authorities accused the opposition of mobilizing violent citizens to make public calls to attack the state and undermine sovereignty. The authorities indicate that the accused face up to 9 years in prison, while Jordan Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze warned that those responsible for the attempted coup will be brought to justice. And in France, the newly appointed Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu resigned from his position 27 days after his designation. Appointed on September 9, 2025, Lecornu became the target of criticisms from the opposition and the French right after revealing that his cabinet was mostly made up of former ministers and people close to President Macron. This way, Lecornu becomes the head of government with the shortest term in the history of the Fifth French Republic. This unexpected resignation marks another major escalation of the political crisis in France, even causing the fall of French stocks and the value of the euro. And also in other topics, on Monday, the Nobel Prize in Psychology and Medicine was awarded to the scientific team of Mary E. Brunko, Fred Ramsdell, and Dr. Shimon Sakaguchi for their discoveries related to peripheral immune tolerance. Brunko is a senior program manager at the Institute for Systems Biology in Seattle. Ramsdell is a scientific advisor for Sonoma Biotherapeutics in San Francisco, while Sakaguchi is a distinguished professor at the Immunology Frontier Research Center at Osaka University in Japan. The winners unraveled an additional way the body keeps the immune system in check. The Nobel Committee said the research started with Sakaguchi's discovery in 1995 of a previously unknown T-cell subtype, now known as regulatory T-cells. As is usual on the first day in October, the week of this award begins, honoring leading figures in the exact sciences, physiology and medicine, as well as in literature and economics. And after this information, we have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram and TikTok as well. For Telesur English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.